Hi, everyone. Again, thank you, IEEE, for the opportunity. This is my first chance to give a public talk since COVID. It's been 3 years, and I'm looking forward to share with you some observations on decentralization. So when we talk about decentralization, I wanted to provide with you a little bit of context and my views on where we are in history. I think we are in a period of time that none of us in our lifetime has ever experienced anything similar. This is only really comparable to the period of Second Industrial Revolution, when you have electricity, telecommunication, and the steam engine coming around the same time and disrupting and transforming every industry that we know. If I may ask for you to put the slide on both so that I can see it. I've just had an eye surgery recently, and I can't see that far, so that I can speak at least synced up to the end. I don't have to look behind me. Perfect. Thank you very much. We've seen maturity of multiple technologies, just as with the Second Industrial Revolution. That's with the artificial intelligence, energy storage, robotics, long-read sequencing. And today I'll talk about the decentralized aspects of it: decentralized computing, decentralized communication, decentralized cloud computing, and decentralized business processes, which I think is a massive trend that is going to bring massive transformations across multiple industries. So what is decentralization? And obviously, like everything, there are different interpretations of that. But to me, decentralization is removal of unnecessary middlemen from processes. When I say unnecessary middlemen, it's middlemen that perhaps can be replaced by technology. They have no merit in the process. The potential benefits of decentralizations to corporations are lower cost, higher speeds, better security and privacy. And for individuals, it has huge impact on our lives because it can translate to financial inclusion and perhaps addressing many of the social ills that we are experiencing today with wealth inequality, the increasing wealth gap. And I'll talk a little bit about that and kind of give you my opinions on why I think that way. But first, let's start with decentralization of computing. With Moore's law, computing is getting embedded into almost everything, right? Our smartphones have much more computing power than very powerful servers just a decade back. When we started our journey in computing, we started with the mainframes, which were obviously centralized systems. Then in the 80s, we had the personal computers, which were practically fully decentralized. And then we went to the era of cloud computing with the client server and eventually central cloud. And we went back into a centralized approach. And we all know that the benefits of that, how cloud computing made mobile internet happen, the app economy that was created. And now we are transitioning to a period which I would call the hyper-connected world, where internet, just like with telephony, what cellular communications did, it made telephony personal. Now we're seeing in the hyper-connected world, basically internet coming not into, like the telephony was bringing communication to individuals, but now we can bring internet to almost everything. Not only individuals, but devices, gadgets, even your clothing and even your body in the future may be connected to the internet. And for that reason, we will be transitioning to a decentralized structure again. So decentralization of computing is going to continue, and I don't know, it's hard to predict whether the pendulum will go back to central, but I would be very skeptical of this. For instance, when you look at 5G, the fifth generation wireless, you see that the spectrum is a much higher spectrum, so the ranges are smaller, so 5G would be very dense networks. And I think with 6G, perhaps you're going to have fiber communication all over with RF energy emanating from fiber. So smaller and smaller cells, because that's the only way you're going to get capacity. Data usage is going to go up, so these networks are going to have to get denser and denser. So we're going to see perhaps this decentralization movement on the network side continue. Now, that's from a kind of communication perspective. Now, going to the cloud topology. The first step that we took was to go from a client server to apps and services. So we have the client on one side. If you look at the, I tried to make this a very simple picture by talking about the device, the network in between, and the cloud core when we talk about cloud computing. So on the device side, you used to have the client that didn't have a microservice in it. You obviously have the network in the middle, and then you would have a monolithic server application, and initially maybe even an API gateway that maybe talked to the monolith. That's how it started. And then it went into a microservices domain where the monolithic application on the back end was broken into microservices. And the benefits of this are immense in terms of energy, in terms of management of applications, maintainability. We all know now everybody's talking about API and microservices. Then we're moving from centralized to distributed. And by the way, this microservice thing is fairly new. It's about a decade old. Only 20% of businesses today have really made this migration. So it's not something that is very mature. But now, from centralized to distributed, you see that devices will have microservices as well. And you're now seeing it, for instance, on laptops with a Docker container. Some of these applications will have a microservice-based approach. They may have an API gateway inside. And as part of 5G, you see on the network, there's something called mobile edge computing, and that's why I put that microservices box on the network itself. And that means now network equipment, perhaps base stations, that the cellular base stations, the gateways, will have the ability to host some of these microservices, because now computing is also massive amounts of computing is available on the network side. So that's another movement towards decentralization and a distributed network. But that's not really the total story of a centralized to decentralized transition. The step 3 is what I call going from a star topology to a hybrid topology. So you see devices that have microservices. In a star topology, these devices would connect through the cloud and would connect through themselves through the cloud core, right? So if you want to complete now the complete transition to a decentralized system, then these devices would be able to discover one another, communicate and connect without necessarily the cloud core. And this is, you hear a lot about the mesh, where devices are kind of meshing with each other, and you talk about the cloud computing with devices talking through the cloud. But the reality is that you need a hybrid system that allows both. So, and the reasoning for this is, when you think about, for instance, two applications that are on the same phone, right? So the back end of both applications are in a server in central cloud. If application 1 wants to talk to application 2, it will go to the back end of the application 1. The back end of application 1 will talk to the back end of application 2, and then the data will come back. Whereas these two are sitting on the same device. They don't even have to go on the network. If one can act as a client and the other as the server, they can directly communicate without the need to go to the cloud. And then the question comes up, oh, but we want to have a global view of this. Yes, you can still do that because you can have the digital twins in the cloud if needed. Certain applications may need it, certain applications may not. So but we definitely are going to, if you're going to have a scalable, hyper-connected world, this is the most efficient way of doing these networks. So that's the story on the cloud decentralization and communication decentralization. Again, communication decentralization, to recap, is about heterogeneous, dense networks. And it's not only about cellular technology, it's about Wi-Fi, it's about Bluetooth. A lot of people say, oh, 5G is going to kill Wi-Fi. We've heard that story with 3G, we heard it with 4G, and it's completely untrue. All of these have their own places, so we're going to have communication embedded into everything that we know, different kind of systems, heterogeneous systems, and then we're going to have also on the cloud side the client-server capability into every device. So what are the benefits of this hybrid edge cloud? My personal passion around this was privacy, because I think in the hyper-connected world, the fundamental asset is the data. Data is going to be the value unit for the hyper-connected world. Just like for the second industrial revolution was coal and oil, the hyper-connected world, data is going to be the underlying commodity asset that is going to drive it. And for people to be able to sustain their lives in the future, they need to get control of their data back. So privacy, when you have hybrid edge cloud, you have more privacy because you minimize the flight of data from edge nodes where we control to central places that larger companies control today. The cost will reduce, the hosting cost, the bandwidth cost of the networks. The cost of cloud, actually cloud was initially promoted as a cheap way of getting computing resources by companies that are running big cloud initiative can tell you. I'm hoping we have speakers today from Uber and Arthur. It's billions of dollars. It's expensive. It's expensive to maintain these cloud services. So you want to minimize the flight of data, and you want to maximize the use of processing resources on the edge of the network. Performance is going to improve. You're closer to the user, so you can do context. And I'm not talking about just the latency, but be able to understand the context better and serve users better, because that's where most of the activity is. Your time to market is going to improve because you're going to have familiar APIs. The same benefits that you have on back-end networks, you bring on the front-end clients. The user experience is going to improve. You're going to have consent-based provisioning that you can do when you have, for instance, AI models running right at the edge of the network, close to the user. Latency is a given. The extreme example that I gave you, two apps on the same device, proves that. carbon footprint is going to go down because you're minimizing energy usage. And of course, interoperability will improve because now you have devices with different operating systems, different hardware, underlying hardware to be able to connect to one another. So that's from the cloud perspective. Then the decentralization of business logic. So I'm sure everyone is aware of Bitcoin and blockchain. The underlying technology is called distributed ledger, which has enabled basically three things: transparency of transactions, immutability, meaning if you make any changes, everybody can see, and then multi-party real-time transactions. And of course, with systems like Bitcoin, there's also the anonymity of transactions, which is guaranteed. You can break these basically into two major types. There's permissionless networks, which are public. It's very similar, for instance, with Bitcoin and Ethereum. These are public networks. They're permissionless, they're transparent, they're anonymous, and they're immutable. Then you have permission networks. Now, with permission networks, these are private with limited participants. So it's a ledger where you can actually control the access, and it's limited. It's not necessarily everyone in public needs to be aware of every transaction. It's the transparency is there, the immutability is there, but anonymity is an option. And it's generally faster and more efficient because these systems are relying on solving a hash problem to ensure the security. Because there's limited nodes, you can make the systems much faster and more efficient. Then you have the hybrid of the two that you can actually mix up these two. In my mind, the permission network are going to have much more fundamental impact than the permissionless networks, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We are in the early years. There are many protocols, networks, there are exchanges, but unfortunately, right now it's rife with greed and scams. It's not the utility of these technologies that's driving, it's the greed that is driving these networks, and you have to be very careful. In terms of their impact, potential impact on our lives, I need to perhaps take us back a little bit and talk about our experience with mobile internet and how it happened. I was involved from 2G till today in this journey of mobile internet. And our passion was, all of us that work, we really thought that internet is going to have such a positive social impact, that information would bring power, it would bring wealth equality, it would bring people closer together across the world, it would create a more peaceful world. It did that to some extent, but unfortunately, in the whole, we saw false starts on this front. And we saw that this ad-driven business model of internet has created some very significant social ills. And we have to be very honest about this, because without mobile internet, I could not see how an organization like ISIS could get 30,000 kids from Western countries to go and fight in Syria. Or the spread of disinformation and people believing in conspiracy theories that are, some people believing that the earth is flat, and people are eating babies, and all of this disinformation that is happening, even today with the situation in Ukraine. Although you see, internet has brought a lot of support, you see that the government in Russia has managed to use the same tool to massively do propaganda, and 80% of the population apparently believes that the government is fighting Nazis. So, and a lot of this goes back to the business model of internet and the ad-driven business model, which was about grabbing eyeballs and feeding people with things that they like. So if you're superstitious, they feed you more superstition. If you're smart, they feed you smart. So ignorant people get more ignorant, extremists get extremists, so you end up in a polarized society, which is very dangerous. Then, of course, from a user experience, these are poor, ad-driven user experiences. You're listening to great music on YouTube and Spotify, and then you get these ads in the middle of it, so the experience is not that great. Cyberbullying, depression and suicide for kids, political manipulation, cyber wars, and most importantly, I believe, if you're a business person, is the highly ineffective advertising. There are now studies after years that these ads, that is almost like $1 trillion industry, they're really not resulting they're not that effective. So brands that are using this are not getting any return for this. And there's an entire industry of data brokers that are going and stealing people's data and selling it to brands, and there's agencies that push these brands to people. And this needs to change, right? And we have gradually, I think we started, when I joined mimik, we started talking about this in 2010. And I remember going to many of the VCs in the Valley and saying that this needs to change. They will laugh at me and say, what do you think, privacy? People are putting cameras in their living rooms and sharing. Privacy is nothing. Facebook is great, right? But now we've reached that realization that needs to change. And I seriously believe that we are going to go towards a more subscription model of this in the future. The other thing is the two-sided model of business, which basically gets suppliers and users in a two-sided model and connect them to each other. That was a bit of a false start as well and needs change because it can lead to monopolies, it can skirt essential regulations. When you try to become a middleman in the process without having a careful study of impacts of these technologies, is going to be disastrous, and we're seeing some of the results of that as well. And again, more importantly, these two-sided models, the way they're done today, they don't provide any ownership to the two sides. For instance, with Uber and Lyft model of the driver and the passenger, drivers and passengers are not getting any shares of Uber or Lyft. They're just collecting, they're getting a service and they're collecting money. So there's no loyalty built in these networks, right? So that has to be changed. These companies need to think through and say, how do you build loyalty? And in that way also provide a more, I would say, fair system of ownership in the future. Now, the response to this are certain trends, and that's what I put on the right side with Web3, DeFi, and DAO. Web3 is about helping people monetize their data on internet. It opens the path for data monetization, right? So that's one side of it. With DeFi, you can enable low-cost financial services to everyone and improve financial inclusion. And with DAO, it stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. You can enable entities to be formed very quickly in an ad hoc fashion with low cost. So it removes a lot of the barriers of people that have great ideas to be able to very inexpensively get together, form organizations, and deliver products and services in the market right from early stages of their company. And again, these are fantastic opportunities, but when you look at what needs to be done, and when you look at the situation today, that I'll talk about on the next slide, it stresses the fact that we need, before we get engaged and jump in to the use of these technologies, we have to think about and set some certain principles. And I try to kind of talk about these a little bit, of what has to be done towards a sustainable decentralization. So currently, this is, as you all know, it's dominated by greed, fraud, and scams, the fear of losing out on the opportunities. People are going and buying, cryptocurrencies, doing investment in things that are highly volatile and risky. We need to really, as engineers, and that was one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to our IEEE folks today, that we need to learn from our past experience and make sure, as technologists, that we work closely with entrepreneurs, economists, social scientists, and policy makers together to make sure that we understand the impact of what we do. We need new models to value data for the future. There's no data economy per se. Nobody can tell you what data is worth, right? So we need to address that. This same thing holds true for digital assets and digital representation of physical assets. You now talk about NFTs. We need to understand what does it actually mean to have a mechanism. Yeah, the technology is there. You can have a physical, the digital representation of the physical assets. But what is the economic impact of this? What is the social impact of this? And the final aim, when people talk about decentralization, a lot of it is they have to be trustless systems. It has to be completely custody-free services. But custody-free services should not be the aim. The aim should be to have efficient, secure, and platforms that the majority of people could take benefits of this without risking their financial future. When you look at that trend and you look at what is happening on the, for instance, monetary policy, you see the central bank digital currencies and cryptocurrencies. So I'm trying to kind of give you a view to where blockchain fits and where the technology fits. When you're starting with the cryptocurrency, but Bitcoin, you've seen the value going up and down. It's very volatile, but if you look at the movement is going up. And in my view, and again, don't take this as financial advice, I think the value is going to go up because the main advantage and disadvantage of this is that it's global, it's a public currency, and it addresses some needs. And these needs are countries that have very unstable currencies. So Venezuela, Iran, many countries that have unstable currencies, people are hedging their bets and putting, and then there's an underground economy, the drug cartels and all of that. So it's addressing a need, it's addressing a demand. So it's very likely that it will go up in price. But you don't need necessarily more than one of these. So these are highly volatile and has uncertain future. If governments come really hard and try to regulate this, you saw the impact of, for instance, China banning Bitcoin. The price of Bitcoin went down significantly when that happened, right? Then you have the central bank digital currencies. There's no question whatsoever that we need digital currencies for the future. Currency has to be smart. We should be able to distribute these things smartly. We should be able to track it. We should be able to use analytics to optimize the financial systems. It has its very advantages in the future. But there's also a drawback to this that we have to be very cognizant of, and that is our privacy, our democratic rights. If the government can one night cut off all our financial assets, if we give that kind of control to the government, the way, for instance, the digital yuan works right now in China, the government can see everything that you do. So we have to figure out, and I'm not pretending that I exactly know how this should be done, but one way of this is to have financial institutions and banks to be the distribution channel for this. But again, this needs to get studied. It's not something that is a very simple problem to solve, but this balance we have to take into consideration. When you look at it today, and the state of where that is, it points you out to the need to set certain principles. So we say, okay, so things are not working well today, it's very volatile, so what are we going to do? So the principles that I thought it was important to watch for, and I kind of listed some of them. One is meritocracy, meaning that all actors, enablers, everybody that is in this ecosystem should be included in the network based on a merit. And that doesn't hold true today. There's, with Ethereum, there's gas fees. Again, there's, you don't, for instance, you don't have that problem in a Hyperledger network. There's no reason, but there should be gas fees on these transactions. There has to be transparency to the people that are running these networks. All officers, directors in these networks should be known and held liable like any other corporate entity. These are digital entities, but it doesn't mean that you can skirt from responsibility and accountability. Everything should be auditable, even if the government cannot see all the transactions real time. If there is a breach, the systems have to be auditable. The networks should be open to the regulators to see if there's a bad actor to be able to prove it and prosecute it. There should be fairness in these networks. Yeah, you know, a lot of these networks, if you invested in it today versus tomorrow, you may have lost, you know, an opportunity 100 times the price went up. That doesn't make any sense. There has to be some sort of a balance in terms of time to participate and what you participate in the networks. And this needs to be taken into consideration. And there are ways to do this, obviously. I'm not getting into how of this. There are a lot of people that are working on various means of, these are all achievable. Organizational clarity, roles and responsibility. The privileges of all the actors needs to be clear. Anonymity should be guaranteed between public members, but the identities should be known to the network operators to prevent these bad actors. The anonymity of internet is not something that should be guaranteed when you're talking about financial transactions. There has to be protections against bad actors, and then the economics should be unmistakable, meaning everybody should know what the fees are, what the rewards are, what the commissions are, so you have absolute clarity on what you're getting into. So, in conclusion, we are really in the midst of an exciting era with a lot of opportunities in the future for businesses to be transformed. We should learn from our past experiences and make sure that technologists, economists, social scientists, and policymakers get together and drive this for the future. And it will be a massive opportunity if we do this. It's not about curtailing innovation or killing a $1 trillion industry. An industry that with no value add to advertising that is making $1 trillion, just think about it. If you turn it around and give the power to people so that they have their data, so this data is not inferred, you can do real value-added advertising. It's not inferred, it's not stolen. You can create a multi-trillion-dollar industry. So this will empower innovation and not inhibit it. So this is basically concludes my talk. Thank you so much.
Siavash, thank you so much for your fascinating presentation. We do have time for one question. There's somebody who has a question that you'd like to raise. Please come up to the microphone.
Sorry, I think I talked a little too much.
Leonard Lee, X-Curve. Enjoyed your presentation, very informative. My question is the list of, I think it was like attributes for sustainable, decentralized computing. What about equity? Because, when you look at the whole crypto economic model as it is today and probably will be forever, the way that these things are architected, what about equity? Because a lot of these are incredibly inequitable, constructs.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the core of what I was discussing in terms of these principles is to ensure equity in the future. If truly we can't get to a mechanism in ways of studying these things to ensure that everyone that participates is treated fairly, we're going to have more wealth gaps. In terms of, for instance, using tokenomics for investments. We all know, for instance, that investment in startups is limited to the rich. Now, with tokenomics and with smart contracts, you can provide ways for people to invest even $1, $2. If you could invest $2 in Microsoft when it started, and anybody could have done that, but it was limited because it's limited to people that have accredited investors, for instance. With smart contracts and DeFi, you can remove that because the cost of legal fees goes down. You can't afford $20,000 lawyer fees to invest $2. That smart contracts would address if you get rid of gas fees, right? So equity is at the core of this, and I'm really glad that you brought it up.
Right. But, so speaking of DeFi, when you go and you borrow on some of those exchanges, the interest rates are ridiculous, right? And so there's an imbalance in the way that they've constructed the market, and where there's the way that they collateralize the loans is questionable.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I was exactly saying. That's why it's fraud, scam, and greed. But the core of the technology doesn't necessarily need that. If you have truly decentralized systems that are well designed with participation of technologists, policymakers, and economists, you can ensure that the technology will allow you to do a smart contract very cheaply. The technology would allow you to have value exchange through tokens that reduces the cost of foreign exchange fees, transfer fees, and minimizes the cost of participation by everyone, right? The way it's done today, I'm totally with you. It's the wrong approach to this. And it's because it's driven by what we call innovation, which is, okay, forget about regulations, forget about how this should be done. Let's just get some tokens, and because tomorrow the value may go up. And if I don't participate today, I'm going to be losing out.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was an important issue to end with. Thank you, Siavash Alamouti. Thank you again.